Hello, world. This is the Know Your Place podcast, and we're on episode 25. That's right, we've hit a quarter of a century of these episodes. On this week's episode, we're going to talk about artists that are completely entwined with the cities they're from. So stay tuned. Hello, world. Charles Altendorf back here on the Know Your Place podcast. And on this week's episode, I wanted to talk about artists that are very known for the cities they're from. Musical artists. And I wanted to touch upon this topic because it's really easy to tie musical artists into countries where they're from. You know, it's very easy to say, well, this is definitely what an American rock band sounds like, or British rock band sounds like, or any number kind of other things. But to me, what's really interesting is artists that a majority of their work sort of revolves around one city or geographic area. And because a lot of artists, write about all their experiences, and a lot of them, write about lots of different places. But the ones I'm going to talk about here today are ones where sort of like the majority of their work comes from one spot. And it's almost like their identity is totally wrapped up in being like the band from this town, So anyway. So the first person I want to talk about is Billy Joel. And I know this is a bit of a throwback for somebody who's a millennial to be talking about Billy Joel, but he's the type of person he's not the only person to write a bunch of stuff based out of New York City. Lots of people have done that too. But his, just the way his songs are written are very, you feel like he's almost transporting you to New York City in a lot of his songs. And, obviously his first major hit, Piano Man, sort of alluded to that, right? It very much felt like a particular neighborhood spot bar he had been hanging out in New York City. But the first song I really during his career, now mind you, I've heard his song. I didn't hear his songs in chronological order or anything. I'm laying out his hits in chronological order, or what I'm going to talk about in chronological order. Because generally speaking, with all of these artists, I think in their first couple hits, it doesn't come out as much that they're from they're forming their identity around a particular city. But then you notice is sort of once they become big, they just feel comfortable with embracing where they're from, and then you're like, wow, this artist really is a part of this place. So anyway, with Billy Joel, his sort of on his, I think it's his third album called Turnstiles, he wrote a song called New York State of Mind. And you feel like he was really describing what the city means to him in this song. And it wasn't really a big hit. It never really did become one, but you could tell that he was getting ready to sort of go into more personal songs from the other stuff he'd been doing, and that pretty much actually kind of is why his career got better, in my opinion, is because the next 4 albums after that, he's just totally comfortable completely describing his life in New York City and Long Island and what it was like to grow up around there. And that leads me to the album The Stranger. Now, in The Stranger, it's all kinds of stuff of his personal experiences in there. And it's a wonderful album. But, in the beginning, it just starts out with that song Moving Out, and you hear sort of the vantage point of an Italian American who's struggling in the city, and his family's telling him to move out to Hackensack, which is, this suburb in New Jersey, and it's so New York. It's like, wow, this is what it was like then. This is 70s New York or 60s New York, and it's just very funny. And then the next song, the song that ends that side of the album, because For all the young people out there that don't know, I'm sure most people do, but records used to be two-sided, and you had one side of an album and another side of an album, and sometimes you could really tell a difference between the sides. Like one side would be great and the other side wouldn't. But in this particular case, Billy Joel decided to end this side of the album, well, him and his producers, I'm assuming, with a long, long song that's called "Scenes from an Italian Restaurant." And basically, you just hear Billy Joel describing his high school days, and it's really cool. It was never a song that was going to be a hit or anything like that. Although I think sometimes radio stations do play it if I guess they need to fill a bunch of time. But it, oh my gosh, it's just so personal. He talks about hanging out, listening to the jukebox with his girlfriend and all these different people he met and what they would all wear. And he's like, I was a greaser, because Billy Joel actually didn't grow up wealthy. He grew up sort of lower middle class and spent a lot of time in the Bronx. So, he wasn't sort of. I think a lot of people just assume that all New Yorkers are wealthy. I never assumed that, but we get this picture of New Yorkers being wealthy, and Billy Joel definitely wasn't that as a kid. So it's very interesting hearing him talk about being lower middle class and running into crushes and what everybody thought was going to happen to them. It's a really cool song. And then, so Billy Joel, I think. These albums were released fairly close together, so I'm not sure how much of this was written beforehand or not. I think a lot of it was, but I think they realized that they were onto something with that, it worked, more so than his beginning songs. Don't get me wrong, Piano Man is a hit, and it's not necessary. It could be a bar anywhere in America at the time period, but they were like, hey, Billy Joel's at his best when he's sort of really going on about growing up in New York City and what life was like for him. So they said, let's just name the next album 52nd Street, which is hilarious. There are, of course, they weren't the first people to do that. The Beatles did that with Abbey Road, although they didn't grow up in Abbey Road. But it was just, you don't see very often artists just really embrace it. Just, not even shy away from the fact that this is where we're from. You can love it or hate it, So anyway, and there's so many tracks on that album that just make all kinds of references. Like, the big hit off of that album was Big Shot. And, you're talking about going to Uptown in a fancy limousine, right? Or then you have, oh gosh, what's that other hit? Anyway, he had, My Life. There we go. Gosh, sorry that took me so long. Anyway, he had that other hit, My Life, and in that song, he talks about bought a ticket out to the West Coast and gives him a stand-up routine in L.A. Apparently, poor people in New York just got sick of it. Eventually, he moved to L.A. I don't know. Anyway, so it's and then some tracks that weren't hits off the album. He talks about Rosalinda's Eyes and blatantly says Spanish Harlem in there. So he's talking about what it's like there. And then, of course, he also has this song called Just a Half a Mile Away, and it's about hanging out in the street corner and drinking and being teenagers and what life was like then, So yeah, Billy Joel is definitely all about New York City, and that's why it's mapped all of his songs. Oh yes, and one more song I was going to mention was a hit he had much later, but it was called Uptown Girl. And that's sort of, at the time when he wrote it, Uptown Manhattan was considered, where the rich were from. So like him being a downtown man saying, well, I'm not from the rich upper crust in Uptown, and yeah, it's just so yeah, it's really cool to see if you really listen to his music, and he was a very great songwriter in my opinion, and you almost in a folk songish way, you hear him sort of describing his life. The next artist I want to talk about is one of my absolute favorite rock bands, and they're called Train. And a lot of people probably knew them originally for the song Meet Virginia. The older crowd did, which came out in 1998. But a lot of the newer people know him for that hit Hey Soul Sister. And, I think, again, we have an interesting scenario here. Pat Mohanan, the lead singer, was actually from Pennsylvania, but the band got together in San Francisco, and before then all of them were struggling artists, and of course, when Meet Virginia became big, then they made Drops of Jupiter, and that became another big hit, and they won a Grammy, and then they had, in my opinion, their third album, My Private Nation, is their best album, and it's great. And then they fell off a cliff and came back and made Hey Soul Sister. But in My Private Nation, again, it's like I sort of said, you feel like they slightly alluded to things that felt like suburban San Francisco, with songs like Calling All Angels and stuff like that. You felt like, oh, hey, they're alluding to it, but they never really fully embraced it. And then, for their fifth album, Save Me San Francisco, they said, screw it, we're just going to embrace it. We're just going to say we're San Francisco's rock band. And boy, did it work out for them. It worked out so well for them. That first hit off of theirs, Save Me San Francisco, their title track, they just, it just describes it. It just embraces it. And in fact, they make a wine, too, called Save Me San Francisco Wine. So, anyway, so they totally embraced where they're from, and they wrote songs about it. And then their second album their sixth album was called California 37. And again, they're just embracing this. They're embracing the fact that they are, because that's a highway outside of San Francisco. They're just saying, no, we're going to be San Francisco's rock band now. We're going to quit trying to make our music sort of something that panders to all of America and just talk about what we think is cool about where we are. And I don't know, I kind of like that better in some ways. There's some artists that pull off talking about all of their country, and then there's other artists who, like I said, they just pull off really well being very regional in their sound. And you can see it mapped all over their music videos, in their song Drive By. The music video is shot at a winery, and then in their music video, 50 Ways to Say Goodbye, starts off with David Hasselhoff in a grocery store, and they're looking at avocados. And I'm not saying that necessarily that has to take place in California, but I feel like the only place that happens is California. So, yeah, anyway, and then, of course, their latest music video from their latest hit, Play That Song, it was filmed in San Francisco, just right in the middle of the streets in San Francisco. So, yeah, they've totally embraced the fact that they're becoming San Franciscan. And, of course, they sometimes in some of Pat's songs now you can even hear... he titled the last Train album was titled A Girl, a Bottle, and a Boat, and, I guess drinking wine on a boat is something you would do in San Francisco with your girlfriend. And on California 37, he had a song called Mermaid, and that's, there's a lot of folklore around mermaids still in San Francisco, especially if you read some older literature written by people from Jack London's era. So, yeah, it's very much describing the area they're from. Then, last artist I'm going to talk about today, because I could really go on about this topic for hours, but I'm going to keep it short, is Nelly. Yes, I'm going to talk about the rapper Nelly. He hasn't totally been forgotten, I don't think. He had a huge run there on about 3 or 4 albums. I guess about 5 albums. But, Nelly is very much about St. Louis. And I gotta say, I really respect him for that, because I think I think if he originally pitched himself as, I'm going to be the St. Louis rapper, I don't think a lot of people would have been like, oh yeah, we're going to buy that stuff, and his first album, where he had Country Grammar, even he alluded to it even in Country Grammar and Ride With Me, but he didn't really fully go, it was kind of like, it's kind of watered down, and then In his second album, Nellyville, you feel like he's alluding to it with what he describes as his utopia in the opening when he sings the song Nellyville, and then of course there's different people alluding to it all the time and a lot of stuff he's saying like I'm a dirty from the loo or all kinds of. You're just like, oh man, this is he's from St. Louis, but he didn't totally embrace it until he came out with Sweat and Suit and then the Sweatsuit all together. And in there he's got his backup crew and he calls them the Saint Lunatics, and oh my gosh, it's just like especially when you listen to the song Fly Away. You think about the racial tension and the troubles and that people have gone through in St. Louis, and he talks about the struggle of being in jail and out of jail, and you just feel like you're being transported there. You feel like you're listening to him speak his soul about his hometown and how he grew up. And then there's this other song called Getcha Getcha, and the St. Lunatics are in it, but they talk about all kinds of stuff. They're like, 3 hours flat I'm in Chicago, saying there again that they're leaving from St. Louis, and they talk about it's just it's very much a part of their writing, and he calls himself a Midwest swinger, and it's cool. It's very cool. So I don't think you can just start out. If you want to become big being this kind of artist, I don't think you can just start out making your songs totally about where you are. Yes, you can, but it seems like the initial hits for all of the artists were somewhat generic. But as your career moves on, I guess, and you've already established yourself, it seems like people are totally cool with you just totally representing your city. Another one I could bring up with that is Mr. Kanye West, right? He in his first album, his hits sounded kind of generic, like Through the Wire and Jesus Walks and stuff. But then, in the College Dropout, the first album of his I bought, he's just totally like, yeah, this is what it's like growing up in suburban Chicago. I'm Chicagoan, and in songs like Drive Slow, talking about that song is, again, it kind of reminds me of Billy Joel's Just a Half a Mile Away, and Nelly's song Fly Away. It all has this sort of I'm growing up and what it's like in my neighborhood and how I came up to what I am kind of stuff, and that's really cool. That's something I really like in my artists and in my music. A lot of people, I don't know how many people really like that as much as I do, but it's what I like. And of course, if we're going to talk about other rappers representing where they're from, we could go into Detroit and Eminem, that's laced all over his songs. The frickin' movie 8 Mile, right? But again, he didn't really start embracing that until his second or third album. So anyways, that's what I think about that. I think it's cool for you to represent your hometown, but I don't know if you can do that in your first major album and become successful. Anyway, yeah, let me know what other artists you all think do that and think are cool. And as always, thank you for rocking Know Your Place, and it's been fun doing 25 episodes so far, so stay tuned. Check out the Know Your Place podcast on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/knowyourplacepodcast, all one word, or on Facebook at facebook.com/knowyourplacepodcast, all one word. And we will be coming soon to YouTube and iTunes, and maybe another social media platform near you. Special thanks to my wife, Sarah, and Jay Graff for the riff.